Hi. When I planned this video, I assumed my rapid-fire speaking ability would let me give you a ton of information in a short period of time. While that is true, it is sadly not true enough to get the story done in under 15 minutes like I would prefer. And when recording this video, I almost put myself to sleep when listening to my rapid-fire run-on sentences. So instead, I'm splitting this into two videos and I'm slowing down my speech. The first video will be on the background I feel you need to have in order to fully appreciate the media climate modern debates occur in, and the second will be on why those debates, due to their existence in the current media climate, are antithetical to democracy. As this is the first video, I will be providing you with my analysis of the differences between the media climate at the time of the debates from the 1960s to the 1980s. However, this topic requires a breakdown of the changes that have occurred in media over the last 40 years, and to illustrate my points, I will be asking you, dear viewer, to watch some astonishingly dull television. Please watch it, and consider what I have to say after. The fate of the nation rests in your hands. The U.S. news industry, ever since the 1980s, with the beginnings of CNN, has had 24-hour news. Prior to 24-hour news broadcasts used to be an hour long, run several times a day, and would cover topics ranging from local sewer lines to missing cats to book and play reviews, and one or two pieces on national interest. With a 24-hour news cycle, you have to fill the airwaves with more information or at the very least, noise. And we've seen that. If you watch the 24-hour news programs, you will inevitably see two people on opposite sides of the argument shouting or cajoling one another and making strident points about this or that before the anchor tells them that they are out of time and ends the piece. We've all seen it. We all consider it to be the news. But even in a traditional news piece, without shouting and spin, we are far from where we were just a few decades ago. Unless you are watching your local news station talking about what happened in your city or township, you're watching a journalistic piece that is merely one part of a larger story trying to tie together threads from all over the United States. That is to say, generally speaking, national news has become less about giving brief facts and more about building, expanding, and playing up a narrative. Just to give you some additional context for how this plays out, here's the full segment that aired on ABC Nightly News a year after Reagan fired the entire Air Traffic Controllers Union of 11,000 people. Warning, this is boring.
August 3rd, 1981, just a year ago, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, went on strike. And it was the most important story of the day.
The strike is now 11 hours old, and the effects are mounting. Half of this country's commercial aircraft have been grounded.
A year ago today, 11,000 air traffic controllers went on strike in picket lines formed here at LaGuardia Airport and at other airports all around the country. For a time, it appeared as if the PATCO strike would be able to shut down the entire airline industry. President Reagan responded by firing all of the 11,000 controllers who went on strike.
I must tell those who failed to report for duty this morning, they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
It was the beginning of the end of PATCO. Air traffic was curtailed almost immediately. The pressures built on President Reagan to back down and let the union live, but he didn't. Instead, the control towers of the country were manned by supervisors and others who kept the planes going at a slower pace and a lighter schedule. The planes flew, but the union was dead, and so were the hopes and careers of thousands of air traffic controllers.
Some people have committed suicide. Some people have a lot of divorces, and there's a lot of problems happening all over the country because of the strike.
There are not as many flights into and out of LaGuardia Airport today as there were before the PATCO strike. For the sake of safety and efficiency, and of course because of the economy too, many airlines have had to cut back on the number of planes they put into the air every day. But the people in the control towers of the country, supervisors, those controllers who did not go on strike, newly hired controllers, and for a while, military air controllers on temporary duty, these people have kept the planes of the country flying. And most of the people who use those planes feel the system is safe.
Seems the same as it was a year ago.
I feel comfortable about it. It's a safe and it's a much smoother operation.
Conditions have never been better. Since the strike started, things got better and they've stayed that way.
Despite a very difficult year, we are on schedule and we're making progress.
For all that, Mr. Lewis admits that the Transportation Secretary, Drew Lewis, admits the system is only about 90% rebuilt. Reports of overwork in the control towers persist, and Congress is on the verge of giving those controllers who did not strike pay increases or bonuses of maybe 10%. The administration is adamant, though, those controllers who walked out a year ago will not work again in control towers. Roger?
Okay, hold your horses. I know that was riveting. You're going to have to watch one more clip for me, though. Now, here's a video put out by ABC News, same company as before, the day after Vindman and Sondland were fired following the Trump impeachment hearings.
To the fallout from impeachment, President Trump retaliating, firing 2 men who testified in those House impeachment hearings. ABC's Kira Phillips is at the White House with more on this story. Kira, good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Well, still riding his post-acquittal high and taking questions from us for the first time since being cleared of the charges leveled against him, I asked the president about political revenge. His response? Ominous. As the day unfolded, it became very clear crossing the president has its consequences. 2 of the key figures who testified in the House impeachment trial now out of a job. Overnight, EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland recalled from his post, effective immediately. That came as Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, the national security aide who testified at Trump's impeachment trial, was escorted out of the White House, fired from his role in the National Security Council. And it was just hours earlier I asked the president about political revenge. His response, ominous. Your press secretary said your political opponents should pay. Who should pay and how will they pay?
Well, you'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Vindman's lawyer issuing this statement. There is no question in the mind of any American why this man's job is over, why this country now has one less soldier serving it at the White House. While Vindman, a decorated soldier, was thrown out of the White House, his bravery was front and center on the debate stage.
Stand up and clap for Vindman. Get up there. Who we are. That's who we are. We are not what Trump is.
Emboldened by his acquittal, I asked the president if he still wants Ukraine to investigate his political rivals. You have been acquitted. Do you still want the Ukrainian president to dig up dirt on your political rivals like Joe Biden?
No.
However, it was just this week the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, told NPR he has not been called off the case.
Let me frame it a different way.
Put it this way.
Are you still investigating?
He hasn't told me not to do it. He hasn't told me not to do it.
Well, Vindman's twin brother, also an Army lieutenant colonel, was too serving at the NSC as a lawyer focused on ethics. He was also fired suddenly and with no explanation, according to his lawyer. Now, all of this raising the essential questions, Eva, as we move forward. Who else could be in the president's crosshairs? Sources close to the president telling us, quote, he's house cleaning all of those he sees as being disloyal to him. Eva?
And we'll have to keep watching to see who else is pushed out. Thanks, Kira.
Okay, if you're still here, bless you. I promise I'm not being dull without cause. First off, let me talk about the ways in which the subject matter and circumstances are similar. Both of those videos deal with the firing of people by a president. Both videos were filmed during the term of a Republican president. Both videos start with a host cueing you for the story, then giving the story to a reporter who carries you through the details they want to highlight before giving it back to the desk. That is about where the similarities end. Let's talk about the differences. First off, language. The reporter in the older clip is in no way putting emotions or emotionally charged language into any part of his piece. I would also like to call your attention to the fact that he referred to Congress rather than the Democrats or Republicans in Congress and didn't call it the Reagan administration, but rather the administration. Compare that to the woman in the second clip. Trump's comments were ominous, and the president was riding his post-acquittal high, emotionally triggering words, substantially more emotionally charged than the other reporter at least. Now, let's talk about the composition of the piece. The first video had the reporter talking to various flyers and asking them for their opinion on the state of flying a year after the layoffs. It also had him on location at 3 different places in LaGuardia. The quote he pulled from the director of transportation was a video of that director saying his piece in front of a camera. Not an easy thing in 1982, at least not as easy as it is today when you can get a camera on you in under 2 seconds, anywhere, anytime. I point this out because it speaks to the amount of time and human labor that had to go into that piece. The woman in the second story is standing in front of what is a green screen when introducing the story. The story itself is largely B-roll footage of her subjects with her monologue over top. The only time she was on site anywhere, as far as I can tell, is when she was asking the president her question. Once she got that soundbite, she was back in the studio. Not even the statement from Sondland's lawyer was voiced by Sondland's lawyer, much less filmed by him, unlike the director of transportation in our first clip. In addition, She directly showed the Democrats and how they were spinning that for their political gain. Not only did the old clip not show political reaction to the firing, but it didn't even mention parties. Pressure was put on the president by Congress, was all that was said in the first clip, versus a video of Joe Biden hamming it up with an audience. Just keep that in mind. Now let me break down some of the reasons they were so different. Part of it was technology, and part of it was the 24-hour news machine. In order to make a news piece in 1982, you had to have a lot more machinery, and you weren't working with digital media or digital editing labs. The videos were jumpy because when they cut to a different shot, they literally cut images from a different reel of media and patched it into the feed. Most importantly, however, was that they had to physically go from the locations at which they shot their content back to a location where they could work on it. Fun fact, Photoshop didn't come out until 1987, and the ability to file share via anything but a letter or a box didn't become available in this space until the creation of the World Wide Web in 1990. That's the technology they were working with. It made everything slower, more cost inefficient, and as a result meant that they couldn't put together a piece as quickly. Now contrast that to the reality of digital media. Millions of B-roll images available for use at any time by any news network. Digital video and photo software, as well as the internet, meaning that a reporter need only be available to record a script and someone else can write it. Someone else can put all the images and formatting elements where they need to go while the reporter is on the ground getting a clip of the president. And then on her car ride back to the studio, that clip can already be put into the reporter's piece by an editing team just in time for her to stand in front of a green screen before the voiced over piece gets put on the air. And the last thing I would like to bring up is the storytelling. This is, in my view, the most subtle and most disturbing difference between old news and modern news media. The crafting of a narrative. I would show you a dozen clips from old news segments if I thought I could paint a stronger picture of this change from providing the news to providing a segment of a larger story that you as a viewer are expected to draw together over time. I can't show you those clips because you'll just leave this video, but I will link them in the description for you to go over later if you choose. News has and always will be only a portion of this whole set of facts. I don't think that a 2-minute and 30-second long piece has the capacity to cover all angles of a story fully and with grace. But I also don't think that a 2-minute and 45-second long piece spent only on one small aspect of a massive story accomplishes anything besides selling more stories like itself. The critical difference as it relates to national discussions, in my view, is that a small sectional piece requires that people pay attention to the news constantly in order to understand why it is important. It is a square in a larger quilt that requires the viewer to stitch it all together by watching more and more news segments to form a full tapestry. In contrast, the older piece portrays itself as the full tapestry. It is the news, and there is no alternative story. There is simply this story. This has its own pitfalls in terms of messaging, but at least with a consistent presentation, the conflict that arises from compelling and diverging narratives does not come up. Instead of following left or right-leaning stories, you and everyone else are all working under the same framework. There is no wedge between you and your neighbor when there is no real divide to push a wedge into. So what is the point of all this comparison? I am merely trying to show that we exist in a different world than the one that existed 40 years ago, a faster, more interconnected world, and that our news media is a reflection of that change. Back in 1982, when that first clip aired, there were only a handful of channels on TV, let alone news channels. And there wasn't any other visual media. You didn't have to worry about getting views or getting clicks because you were one of only a few games in town. Everyone was already going to be watching you anyway, and that meant you had to be concise with what you said. You could only focus on a few stories each day, and there was a much heavier weight of public trust put upon a broadcaster's shoulders because people couldn't go find alternative narratives like they can today. So what are my salient points? First, 24-hour news, which has only been around for 40 years, can only work when they are churning out content and that those small pieces form a larger, more comprehensive, but more viewer work-intensive picture than it used to. 2, that the current system, much more than the older system, cues the viewer for a specific emotional response and uses more emotionally charged language and imagery in order to bring views. 3, because they are trying to create a story and a narrative rather than just giving you a full story in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, they have to manufacture story elements. Stories need conflict, they need rising action, they need drama. Political parties and their increasing divisiveness are essentially a shopping mall for all of these story elements. And number 4, The older system did not have to fight as hard for eyeballs. Broadcasters feel a greater need for flash because without it, they won't get eyes. And without eyes, they lose ad revenue. And if they lose ad revenue, they die. Simple as that. And now, you have the framework I feel is needed for me to talk about the real issue, which is the debates. But alas, I have taken over 15 minutes of your time, and I doubt anyone would even bother watching a 30-minute video on what some unknown YouTuber has to say about politics. But good news! I'm uploading both of these videos on the same day, so that if you would like to see more rapid-fire chatter about the failings of discourse inside a system that is inherently bad for calm discourse, please pop on over to the next video. Thank you. Spencer.